and good morning. Rick Singleton here, Provost of Queen's. You know that. You've participated in the sessions prior to this. Welcome to today's class, and those who were participating by viewing the recording, welcome as well. What we have on the agenda for today is I'll be taking a little bit of time on the conflict management theme that we've been into, but we won't spend too much time on that, maybe half an hour to 45 minutes, including a bit of attention to the conflict management style inventory that I distributed a little while ago. And then I'll hand it over to the Venerable Gerald Westcott, who's going to take the rest of today's session and the next session in a couple of weeks on spiritual development. And of course, that's so much about what this course is designed to do, and this program is designed to do, is to try and equip people who are in ministry with the competencies and, as I say, the confidence as well to provide supervision for those preparing for ministry. But the feedback that I have on it is that people find some of the material helpful, not only in the sense of working with students who are preparing for ministry, but also in working with others in their congregations and otherwise. Supervision, an important part of the leadership role of pastors and people in ministry. And then there's the second aspect of it, which is, I would say, the more important one, is the spiritual development. We also want to try and build capacity in a broader community so that pastors can provide spiritual guidance and support to people who are preparing for ministry, and I guess others as well, for sure, which is part of their mandate, but particularly for those who are doing programs and need to have some not only academic studies and practice of their pastoral skills, but also spiritual formation. And so that's what the two major components of this program are about. So in front of you on the screen there is what we're going to do today. But before we do any of that, let's take a few moments to have a prayer. Let us pray. Creator, we open our minds and hearts to you. We ask you to enlighten us, help us to have insights to ourselves, to others, to the dynamics of relationships, and to the richness that your Spirit brings to all relationships. We ask that we be able to see past differences, find ways to resolve them, and to coach others to improve their skills for ministry, academically, pastorally, and spiritually. We ask all this in the name of Jesus, the Lord. Amen. Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, I distributed, or longer than that, I distributed a conflict management style inventory. I'll just pop it up here on the screen now, and invited you to complete it. And those who are doing this program for credit were asked to do a piece of writing and reflecting on it, so I received that from a fair number. And I want to say about it, obviously this is a pretty simple little tool. It's only 15 or so items that people score themselves on, and then you self-score your sheet, and it kind of categorizes it in I might say, kind of a light-hearted way, or something, not a very sophisticated way, by describing a few of the major conflict management styles. But a few benefits to doing something like this, other than that it's short and sweet, so to speak. It also helps us kind of recognize that there are kind of dominant conflict management styles that people have, or even almost say relationship styles, but let's call it conflict management styles. And when people find themselves in a situation of conflict, they typically tend or seem to have a preference, almost like Myers-Briggs type of stuff. There's almost an instinct to be this way, one way or another, and then whatever happens from that happens. But what you can become aware of, and usually in reading through the profiles of the different types, we'll talk about them in a few moments. They're named here by things such as the competing shark, or the avoiding turtle, or the accommodating teddy bear, or the compromising fox, or the collaborating owl. Well, what you usually find when you're reading through the profiles, right away someone pops to mind, probably not yourself, but someone else that you've had reason to experience or observe, or whatever the case might be. Oh God, that describes that person so much to me, because that was their dominant way and their only way. One of the advantages to being aware that there are kind of typical styles of conflict management, and hopefully through the bit of discussion we've been having, to be aware of the importance of being aware of your own conflict management style, and that sometimes the way that comes natural to you is probably not the best. And sometimes some people, and I found this in counseling with people, especially about relationship stuff, that they would admit that their own way of trying to deal with things quite often makes matters worse. And when they get that insight, if they are graced, we might say, with the willingness to be self-aware and to self-monitor and find themselves responding rather than reacting to situations, and by the difference there, but the difference for me to repeat it is, when we respond, we're a little bit more reflective. We take a little bit of time to slow ourselves down to consider what is the best way to deal with this situation so that I'm not going to make things worse. And in the leadership role, we typically have to kind of keep two things in mind above and beyond our own feelings and egos and what have you. We also have to keep in mind, what is the goal? What I'm doing generally, the mission, the vision, that kind of large thing, but also in this particular undertaking in our own congregation at this time, or as far as that goes, in our own family at this time, what is the goal? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish? That's the one. The other thing is, what does this do about the relationship? What does it do if I push my way and be uncompromising and have that need to win and be right, so much so that the other person feels overwhelmed, feels unappreciated, and what have you? So those are a few things about, the generalities of understanding and appreciating that there are a variety of conflict management styles, and then being aware of our own. Now, you can Google as well as I can. Everyone can Google. That's one of the things nobody has to learn anymore, how to Google. But one of the things that you will find is more sophisticated inventories and assessment tools for conflict management style. This one's fairly straightforward and fairly simple. Sometimes a worthwhile little tool to use with a group that you're working with. At the start of a project, it can be worthwhile to kind of say, now, we have to acknowledge that we're not always going to see everything exactly the same way. So let's be aware of how we typically deal with conflict, so that we're ready and open to name it for ourselves and for others. And it kind of lays out the reality that sometimes the process that we use to try and make things happen overshadows the actual goal and the relationships, and may do damage to them. So anyway, with all of that said and done, I'm going to stop talking for a few moments and ask any of you who would be willing to comment on observations or insights that you have from completing that conflict management inventory. Some of you are saying, what's he talking about?
I found it interesting because I thought I was one, but when I went down through that, I came to realize I was totally opposite of what I thought I was.
Is that right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Yeah. And of course, you know, part of it is not so much what you score, but when you read their profile, you can relate to exactly, you know, how I do it, or quite clearly how you know, you're more inclined to do it. And so it isn't so much the score as what you can relate to yourself. But tell us a bit more about that, Neil. And I'll ask online, can you all hear Neil when he speaks?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
Well, for me, it was an awakening of the self-awareness tool, because in the conflict and stuff I've dealt with, I thought I was probably the shark. You know, I wanted it done and done now, and this is how it's going to be done.
Mm.
But when I went through the questions, I came more in the turtle and the owl for a longer term. But I think at the end of it, when push come to shove, this when the shark came out. But overall, it's the lesser ones.
Yeah.
It's like it sounds like true confessions. It sounds like I hope and pray that everything will work itself out over time. And when it don't, and everything just comes together and hits the fan, you've got to take charge and say, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I don't know if that's really healthy. Because thinking back, it's like, whoa.
There can be a time when that's the only thing that can be done. You know, if there is a drop dead time, you know, deadline and what have you, well, you know, sometimes the decision has to be made. But thanks for that, sharing those insights, because it brings to mind a couple of other things that I need to say about using this type of an instrument for conflict management, like Myers-Briggs and those types of things. Most times, most people over time kind of become more aware that I have to kind of plan. I have to figure out how I'm going to approach this. And so probably because of incidents in the past that didn't work out so well, you discover, you know, I won't do what I'd like to do. You know, right? I'll hold back a bit and I'll do it a bit different, because the goal is more important than, you know, my instinct or my ego or whatever we might call it. Well, what often happens, and this is in Myers-Briggs type of stuff, I'm sure you all know what Myers-Briggs is, the personality type indicator stuff, where you talk about introverts and extroverts and sensors and feelers and those things. But the thing is, as people mature, they usually mellow a bit. They would, if they can, you know, score that every 2 or 3 years over a 25 or 30 year career, the vast majority of people would kind of, their range would kind of close in, that they would be, you know, a bit more of everything and not as much all the time in one category. But where you would find that they really put a big spread, we might say, or really score high in particular things, is when they're stressed. We put people in stressful situations, and we do what we always do, is revert to what comes natural to us. And one of the things that comes natural to people in times of stress is sort of the fight and flight instincts, survival instinct, and so we do what comes natural to protect ourselves. So the less time we think about it, the less time we have to think about it, the more likely we are to kind of, you know, have a knee-jerk reaction on things. The second thing about it is that being aware of this stuff gives us a point of reference, so that it doesn't take us as long to think about it. You know, if we're informed on something, then put ourselves in a situation of stress, we might be inclined to react in a particular way, but we have kind of as easy recall and available to us to say, oh no, I won't do it that way as much as I feel that I would like to. But you kind of are blessed with that insight. We'll come to it in a few moments. Basic principles of leadership again. I'll remind you of them. Thinking beyond the moment. So thanks for that, Neil. Any other comments from anyone? Anyone online with any comment about the profiles, or want to highlight anything about either one of them?
It's Paulette here. I found it a really good exercise again, and I found that I was kind of in between a lot. And in one way it surprised me, but another way it didn't, because I find, and I mentioned this in my reflection, like before I did my conflict management course at Queen's, I would completely avoid all the time, right? But I found that course really, really helped me look at it from a different angle. And the competing shark, I'm not usually like that, but I can if I'm backed into a corner. And like you said, if I feel like there's no other way. But the way I operate, I always try to keep relationships, strong and open. And so I think that's kind of, when I look down through it, a lot of the ones that I scored highest on were relationship based, right? So I think that came through really strong.
Great, thanks, Paulette. Anyone else with a comment?
Bob here.
Bob, great.
I didn't do the exercise, but I have done the conflict management style before, and I guess I ended up with a collaborating owl, but I can be the shark if I have to, but as you said, sometimes the goal is more important than winning and losing. I spent 3 years as a prison chaplain, and having counseled inmates, just them and I in one room, you learn very quickly that you don't want conflict. But I think it's just trying to read the person and hear what they're not saying, body language. And sometimes you just have to realize that it's not going to come out the way you think it will. There's just no way that it's going to happen, and to be okay with that, because sometimes walking away from it can be a victory too.
Oh, indeed.
Okay.
Indeed. Well said. Yeah, trying to, well, term that's used on this kind of stuff is conflict management, isn't it? It's not conflict elimination. That's virtually impossible. When you're in a leadership role, you will have others that have their perspectives and their notion of how to make things happen and what have you. But managing the conflict and trying to stay focused on the goal, how to get there. And as the old cliche would go, sometimes longest way around is the shortest way home. Relationships, though, are so important, aren't they? And that's where we sometimes, particularly in pastoral ministry or any leadership role, we can become so focused on the task at hand that we set aside the relationship with the person, and it takes a lot longer to repair if we've been negligent on that. Any other comments from anyone here in the room or online?
Hi there, it's Paul.
All good.
I've noticed. Hi. I've noticed that when I am not operating with the, I guess, with the perspective that I'm actually there to serve, that I can slip into more of an aggressive role and where I need to win. But when I've been convinced of something and of the goal, it's much easier to be more collaboratory, and to be more of have a servant mindset instead of trying to be the right one.
Yeah, and that again comes very much from practice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Getting ourselves in. Remember last, both times I used a short quote from William James, but it reminds us, of really what I suppose vocation is. It's a way of life. It's who we are. It goes way beyond a job and what have you, to being the nature of the person. William James says it so well. I'll just use a little quote again. He says, "You sow a thought, you reap an action. You sow an action, you reap a habit. You sow a habit, you reap a character. You sow a character, you reap a destiny." And that's some of what these types of initiatives are about, is to give ourselves something to think about so that we can think about them and put them into practice in an action and repeat them often enough that they become the habit, to the point that they become who we are. And it sets up what we become In other words, our destiny. Any other comments or observations? Okay, so for those who have work to submit on as a part of doing this as a credit course, they'll be sending along your reflections on this activity and insights, and as the assignment calls for. But for others, it's a tool that you have available, and as I say, sometimes it can be an interesting little one to use with groups that you're working with. We talked a little bit in the past about the importance of giving constructive feedback and what happens when we don't. You know, if there is an issue or problem with something and it isn't being dealt with, then what happens is that we wind up letting the problem become difficult. People either aren't aware of it or figure, well, it's not important enough to be dealt with or whatever. I always remind people of that kind of rule of thumb, as I'd call it, is to avoid the hint and hope method, because that's the one that sometimes people revert to. And just to go back to the conflict management style, what types of leaders would likely be inclined to use the hint and hope rather than being more direct and coaching and dealing with providing constructive feedback or helping people deal with issues that they might need to deal with in their roles? Any comment? Who would be the ones inclined to?
Maybe the avoiding turtle?
Yeah, most likely, for sure. Yeah. They don't want to deal with it head on, and especially if they always want to be nice. And the concern with establishing a relationship or maintaining a relationship is so important to them that, in fact, they put everything else at risk, and that's unfortunate in some situations. So it's got to bring the slide up to the full screen. Just remind you again of what we refer to as principles of leadership. Here again, thinking of the different profiles of conflict management, some will pop to mind as being more at risk for not complying, we might say, with principles of leadership. We think focus on the situation, issue, or behavior, not on the person. Right? If we're able to keep a good focus on the situation or issue or behavior, not on the person, it really helps to make sure that the relationship stays strong and healthy and isn't unnecessarily put at risk or damaged, because the person isn't. The person isn't offended, embarrassed, or the other things that usually cause harm. Likewise, maintain a self-confidence and self-esteem of others. Maintain constructive relationships with others speaks for itself. Take initiative to make things better. Lead by example and look beyond the moment. Again, I bring back to the two major kind of initiatives that anyone in a leadership role, as a pastor or any other leadership role in an organization, to kind of work with is the goals. You know, how do we get done what we're committed to doing, what our whole vision and mission is about, as well as relationships. So the basic principles, you can see, kind of bring both of those to one. Last time we spent a bit of time on giving constructive feedback, so I'm just going to bring up the key actions. What I do with these, and this is kind of the content of the conflict management course that we've had at Queen's, and we'll be doing conflict management as the number 2 is repeated twice. So anyway, you can see that. In the new course that we're introducing this winter on leadership and administration in the parish context, it really has 2 major components to it. One is conflict management and the other is change management, as well as a few administrative things on top of that. But so anyone who might be interested in those, and we'll be taking some of the components, the major components of the conflict management course. So we basically approach it with principles of leadership, and then take some of the major types of situations, such as giving constructive feedback. How do you apply those principles in a situation where your task ahead of you right now is to give constructive feedback to a person that you are supervising, whether they be an employee or a student or what have you? How do I help them to see that something that they're doing or not doing is a bit of a problem that needs to be corrected? So these key actions here are the application of those basic principles on that type of a situation. We used examples in the previous classes, so they're there. And also a couple of rules of thumb with that one is to, that if you can't think of a constructive purpose, then don't give the feedback, because if it ain't constructive, what's it going to be? Not going to be neutral. It's going to be destructive. And the other one is that don't take too long to get to the point.
Yeah.
And the point is to tell the person what the issue is, why it's important to you, what you've seen, and then to give the person an opportunity to say what they think of it. Is it something they've noticed about themselves? Is it something they do but they didn't realize they do that, or that they don't do it, or that this is a habit they have, or whatever the case might be? If you can get to the point of allowing the person to have to say about it in 60 seconds, it sets up for good, healthy dialogue. If you take too long to explain your point and to over-justify why you're trying to deal with it, that's a difficult time. It's a dark valley experience for the person who's receiving the feedback, because they're hearing this now as a criticism, and it's being overstated, and their mind goes into defensive mode. So by the time you give them an opportunity to have a say, they're trying to rationalize it or to justify themselves, or come back with a criticism if they want to do it that way. Okay, that's pretty good. Repeating the same thing again. We're not going to take time on it. The other aspect, and we touched on this last time, is positive recognition. So important. One of the strongest motivators in organizations. Gives people enthusiasm to do their best, to know that they're valued. And positive recognition, of course, has big impact on the individual, that you are noticing and commending for their commitment, that they're doing a good job, whatever the case might be. But the spillover on it is that it has big impact on an organization. Let's just take a few moments to consider that. What is the impact beyond the person, we'll say, that's getting a compliment, to use it that way, or getting positive feedback on what they're doing, getting recognition for a job well done? What's the impact on others when that is done and done well? I'll throw out a teaser on it. What's the impact on morale within an organization?
Hi, it's Ruby here. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ruby, yeah.
One of the biggest impacts is that it uplifts the whole group. And when someone's happy, you know, you're happy about your job, you're happy about what you're doing, that's going to spill out on everyone else. And it feeds the others as well. So you're going to get good productivity, so to speak. And in our situation, we're dealing mostly with volunteers. So that part is good. People are going to want to work together and often produce more and give more than they would have if they're unhappy or not feeling good about themselves.
Oh, indeed. Indeed.
This is Kay. Ultimately, people are going to go out after you've had a discussion about something. People are going to go out into the wider congregation or the wider area with some reaction to the discussion, and it certainly would be preferable that it be positive and spread a positive message throughout rather than a negative one, because if you have one negative person whispering in the ear of many, it can lead to a lot of trouble down the road.
Indeed. Indeed. Thanks, Kay. Any other comments or observations, or to push on to the other items there? Anyone willing to share an experience of a positive sort, or when feedback was ignored?
This is Bob. I believe what I think it would do is the person's self-esteem would be in better shape, and I think that they would value themselves and feel that they're playing an important role, and you would get, as someone said earlier, you would get better productivity out of them. And also when they talk to other people about this situation, you yourself become known as a person who is fair and approachable, that sort of thing. And I think that's important, because a lot of times people will not come to you because they're sort of concerned about how you're going to react. And so I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Any other comments?
Andrew, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
This is Andrew. I know it's important to work on our weaknesses and work on maybe problems that we're facing, but it's probably even more important to work on what God has blessed us with and the strength that we have. So it's extremely important to let people know, they're a big, valuable contribution to the team, and help them work on that just as much as it is to work on a problem that they might have.
Yes. Yeah.
James here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. I think positive feedback it's good for helping to build up the person that you're talking to. Most people everybody's in a journey of self-discovery in one way or another, and positive feedback always helps someone to realize the next step in that journey. It helps reinforce the good things in them and fosters continual growth.
Yes, so true. Thanks for that. One other item that I mentioned on this one, does any pitfall come to mind? Is there anything that you need to bear in mind as a leader about giving recognition?
Hi, it's Ruby again.
Yes, yeah.
I would say don't be patronizing. Be honest and sincere. Don't say things that aren't true or just to butter somebody up so that they won't quit on you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. People see through that pretty fast.
I think that, this is Paul speaking, I think that one of the dangers is that when you praise someone, there's a danger of overlooking someone else.
Yeah.
So you need to take real care as to not be showing favoritism or whatever.
Yeah. That's a really important part. And sometimes you weren't showing favoritism, but individuals might accuse you of that. There's always a little bit of or often at least, a bit of a competition amongst people. Things that you wouldn't know about yourself, but very relevant. And any other comment before we push on? James, I see you have your mic on. Welcome. Do you have any? Just happen to be turned on, or did you want to make a comment? Okay, mic off. So let's see. Okay, let's just push along and a couple of other things about recognition. Good supervisors respond to recognition when things are going well. Effective frontline leaders use recognition as a tool to achieve personal and organizational excellence. So everyone benefits when it's done well. I think this one I used with you last time. It's the kind of the 80-20 type stuff. We know that about 80% of people are in the middle, and you have some who are substandard and some above standard, but not everyone in the middle 80% are performing at the same standard either. So, part of the goal of a leader in any organization is to make it as productive, or to not only productivity, but think of morale, think of commitment, think of charity, the numerous things that are part of the standard that you would hope to achieve in your faith community, your congregation, and trying to shift it all towards the higher standard is in fact what we would be, I mean, it's what evangelization and proclamation and leadership, and we use the words interchangeably in this kind of a context. And so recognition can help that shift towards the higher standard, and not only to bring those who were substandard into a better performance, but even those who are performing within the range of standard to a higher performance, and even above standard. So it's not overly complicated, and that's the nice thing about giving recognition. And these couple or these three key actions. These key actions are an application of these principles of leadership into the situation where you want to give recognition. 1, describe the results you are recognizing as specifically and immediately as possible. State why these results deserve your personal appreciation. And close by reaffirming your recognition and continuing support. Not overly complicated, is it? Well, what are the power words? What are the power words in each of the key actions? Let's go with the first one. What's the power word or words in the first one? Describe the results you are recognizing as specifically and immediately as possible. What kind of jumps out there? Anyone here or online?
Bob.
Specifically and immediately, I think.
Okay, Paulette, and then I had someone else speak for Paulette first.
It was Bob. Results.
Okay. Results. Any other word? Paulette, I didn't hear you when you were making your comment.
Oh, sorry. Specifically and immediately.
Specifically and immediately. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The advantage to that, to describe the results specifically and immediately, is that it kind of protects you from that accusation of being patronizing, you might say, or giving preferential treatment or special recognition to someone and ignoring others. If you connect your feedback to specifics, what has been done, there's not just broad generalities, but things that are specific, and you respond to them as soon as you can, either right at the event or shortly afterwards, or when you're reading the report, or when the person is at the meeting and they're giving the report or what have you, to be able to comment specifically what it is that they've achieved or that they've done or that they've led, or as a group, it's not always individual, then that makes a difference as compared to just a big, broad, or not big, broad thank yous are great as well. But when it comes to giving recognition that motivates people, it's that you notice, it's that you appreciate, it's that people are not being taken for granted, that their gifts are offered and appreciated and making a difference. That's what you're making happen in the first one. The second one, what would you say are the power words there, and any comment on why they might be important? State why these results deserve your personal appreciation.
Bob, appreciation.
Appreciate.
Paulette, deserve.
Deserve, yeah. You want to comment on that a little bit, Paulette, because that kind of draws us into whether someone deserves appreciation. And I know sometimes people debate that, and I suppose there's two sides to it, but whether or not, we should just presume, well, this is your baptismal call, as some would say, and so we expect to be saying thank you to people every time they do something. We should just be expecting them to do it. Some would say, well, but that's taking people for granted. And, so Thanksgiving is an important dimension of both worship and Christian charity. So,
Yes, I think so.
and the deserved
Oh,
work.
sorry. Yeah, I think, as human beings, that's something that really builds us up and helps us continue our lives and our ministry, is being appreciated. And I think most people, if they're, giving of their time and their energy, and they could be doing anything. So when they take the time, like I find with my choir and my lay ministers and anybody like that, I just, I try to thank them every Sunday just for, coming and being there and taking of their time to worship and to be a part of the leadership of the worship.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Paulette. Any other comments on that? I'll just bring you back on that one too, or in the whole giving recognition again to the William James line. That when we think about this, it prompts us to do it, repeat it. Becomes so. It isn't as laborious then on the leaders themselves when it becomes our nature and our character to notice what people are doing and to express appreciation for it. And talking about that moving from action to habit to character to destiny, you know what you're establishing for yourself and for the community when we have that type of rapport and high regard for people's participation. And the third one, close by reaffirming your recognition and continuing support. Any comment on that? Any comment on what might be the power word or the indicator word on it?
Reaffirming.
Reaffirming, yeah. And a continuing support, It's about continuing to be connected. And that, I think, is basically how you would, it's a kind of a short sentence at the end of a relatively short conversation, So thanks again for what you did with that project, whatever the case might be. Really, I really appreciate it. The whole parish appreciates it. And anytime you're into anything, if there's anything we can do to help it along, anytime you're leading a project, let me know. It's your continuing support. So it's not overly complicated. These don't have to be long conversations. You don't have to set up an appointment or make special visitations. You might in some circumstances, but typically they're meet the person and you seize the opportunity to give the recognition, promptly rather than delaying on it. That's one of the things I find that, if there's something that comes to your attention that happened well, turned out well, you observe it while there's, something going on here at the college or wherever, and you think, oh, this is really good. But if I put it off very long, I'll forget about it, because most likely I will be within the day blinded by 2 or 3 things that didn't go so well. Guess what? What's going to get more attention again? Back on that scale we had a few moments ago. But anyway, folks, I'm going to wrap up my bit of it here on this portion of it, and I'm going to hand it over now to Gerald, to the Venerable Gerald Westcott. First course I ever taught at Queen's College, a good while ago now, was conflict management course.
Yes, I've been ruined ever since.
And one of the students
teaching here for. All he does is cards.
One of the students, and it was Gerald Westcott, and it made teaching the course really easy because he was a perfect example of
Conflict management.
Gerald thought that teaching a course on conflict management meant teaching him how to be in conflict.
I want all you listening to know what I like about Rick the most is nothing. not a thing.
Anyway, with all that said and done, it's a great privilege to me today to introduce Gerald. Gerald's been involved with us at Queen's now since last year, different undertakings, especially in spiritual development activities, and good work with it. So this is my practice of
and you're really struggling.
It's not as easy as it sounds.
I can hear you struggling.
But anyway, Gerald, it is great to have you with us. Our students appreciate it, and our faculty. And great to have you participating in this this one today. And of course, you'll be done after Christmas. So I'm just going to make your slides, these slides, and okay. So here they are. We're continuing to record, and I'll hand it to you. I'll just ask online, can you see Gerald's slides there now and all that goes with it?
Yes.
Okay, great. You sit here, my man.
There's no break or nothing.
No, we don't break because we're recording it, and that only makes it a bit of a thing. And I think most people who are online are comfortable with not having a break because there's less formal, less demand for you. You can grab a cuppa if you need to and what have you. And those who are here are welcome to do the same as well.
Well,
And I'll just stay here for a little while
No,
to
do
make
it,
sure
yeah.
things are going well. I'll be stepping out, and then I'll come back if,
yes,
in a little bit.
do that, just make sure we get this all figured out. But what I want to do just before we actually start, I just like to get a little feel for the community that's here. So I got a little list here. I just want to go through and just to know who's here and kind of where you're at. So we have Jolene is here in the room, and Neil. Paulette's out there.
I am.
Paulette. And is Gloria with us today? No.
I would say Gloria.
That's right. And if we have Charlene Lang. Charlene, you on?
I'm here.
Charlene, where are you
Yes,
at?
I'm in Baybert, Parish of Steel Cove,
Yes.
in the Western Diocese.
Yeah. And we have Kathy. Is Kathy with us today? No? Kathy Lasky.
She's in the Brunswick.
Right. There's Paul Rideout. You out there, Paul? Good. We have
Paul
James.
usually gets the recordings.
Okay. James Spencer. You out there, James? Bob LeBlanc.
Yeah, I'm here, yes.
Where are you at, Bob?
I'm in New Brunswick, the Diocese of Fredericton, up in Florenceville, McCain country.
Yes, boy. McCain's. The Neil's here in the room. We have Andrew's out there. Andrew home? No?
It was out a few moments ago.
I saw Andrew. Mary Rose. Ruby.
Rose.
You out there, Mary?
Mary Rose Colburn? Yeah.
Where you at, Mary? Hello, Mary.
Okay.
How about Ruby?
Yep, I'm here.
Where you at, Ruby?
I'm in Bay St. George and Stephenville Crossing on the West Coast.
Oh, look at you. Beautiful, beautiful weather out there today. Beautiful colors along the countryside. We have Catherine. Is Catherine with us today?
I am. I'm generally known as Kay, only called Catherine at baptism and ordination.
Hey.
And I'm in Bombay.
Hey, you're a problem. I can see it now. So who else out there that I haven't mentioned?
It's Dave Alston here in Moncton. Better late than never.
Dave's in Moncton. Dave, who else?
Hi, Gerald. It's James. I think when I spoke earlier, my mic was on mute. So, James Spencer, Parish of Buren.
Ah, look at you. They made you a priest, eh?
Yep. A week ago.
Yes.
Congratulations to you and blessings on you,
Yeah, the
James.
church is in trouble, James. I met you. Who else is out there? Anybody else?
Paul's here in Fredericton, New Brunswick.
Who I'm sorry, in Fredericton?
Paul?
Paul's in Fredericton. Okay. Anybody else?
Brent Ham from Parish of Riverview, just on the other side of Moncton.
Wow, look at all these mainlanders. I didn't know you were so welcoming and hospitable that mainlanders do the course. Anybody else? All right, fair enough. I want to begin by, of course, this session is on spiritual development in your own relationship to students or others that you may be supervising a relationship with. And I'm going to begin by reading a Rumi poem. Rumi is a 13th century Islamic Sufi. He's a poet and a theologian. And this is a book in a collection of poems by Colin Barks. And the book is called Soul Fury. And it's about Rumi and Shams, who's his soul friend, and friendship. So I'm just going to read you this short poem. And And then we're going to take a few moments and do a little bit of breath prayer, just to kind of get us out of our head, because that's where Rick likes to dwell, is in a dualistic, separated mind that's always in conflict. But I want to invite you into your heart during this time, and so we're going to breathe our way into that and connect with each other. So we're just going to listen to this poem and then a little bit of breath prayer. There is a sane breath companion who gives you the desire to come into a sacred place. Breathe and taste that breathing to the end. Call it grace or vast generosity. It is not some teasing amour. Breathe and taste that breathing. So just take a few moments now. I'd like for you to just focus on your breath as a way of kind of getting out of your head a little bit now, because one of the things that we're going to be looking at during this time is about a deeper listening than our minds. We're going to be able to, as we spiritually companion others, we want to be able to listen with our hearts, our spiritual hearts. And so just take a few moments now and just focus on your breath now and breathe in, like in that upper room with Jesus and his disciples. Just allow yourself to breathe in that divine breath, that divine love that God has for you and in you. And just to breathe out your love for God. So just for a few moments now to try to drop below our thinking minds a little bit and into our hearts. And now with our hearts opening a little more, just return to our group here. Now make sure I get these to move. As we look at this component of this course about spiritual development, the spiritual aspect of formation that you may be responsible for, the relationship between spiritual development and deepening prayer of both supervisor and student, it's a shared journey. So it's not something that you're doing to the one you're supervising. As we begin in a relationship, there's a mutual listening for what God is doing. Not only what God is doing or what love is doing in the relationship of the person that you're supervising, but what God is doing in you. And so when we say yes in a covenant relationship of companioning, spiritually companioning, we're both being awakened to a journey of transformation that goes two ways. So in other words, we don't encounter God in another person without being changed ourselves. So this is your journey as much as it is the one that you're supervising. I just want to read you a quote now from Richard Rohr about the deepening process of our own prayer, of our own hearts, of our own love. He says, if your prayer goes deep, invading your unconscious, your whole view of the world will change from fear to connection, because you don't live inside your fragile and encapsulated self anymore. In meditation, you are moving from your ego consciousness to soul awareness. from being driven to being drawn. Of course, you can only do this if someone else is holding on to you in the gradual dying of the false self, taking away your fear, doing the knowing, and satisfying your desire as a great lover. We're going to go on with this quote in a moment. But just as we hear these words now, is that in order for us to connect, there has a part of ourselves that has to die. You know, Jesus says that whoever tries to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will save it. And the kenosis, or way of the cross of Jesus, is the dying to ourself, dying to our false self. And what that means is getting underneath or deeper than our ego, fears, and personalities. It means getting underneath the limitations of our thinking minds, our dualistic minds, which cannot connect with God. And so the invitation in the way of Jesus is to die to this, but open up and enter into our larger, truer self, which is made in the image of God, which is that branch on the vine, which is our Christ life. And so that in the whole area of spiritually companioning another, you have to be very aware of what's going on in your own spiritual process. And I love this last line, satisfying your desire as a great lover. I mean, the longing and desire of all our hearts is to be in love. And that is to be in God, that is to be in Christ. And so what we're doing when we're spiritually companioning another is we're actually falling into love with each other, something deeper than our minds. This is called communion, that holy union. So where it goes on in this same quote, he says, if you can allow that someone else, that deeper self, to have their way with you in contemplation, I love that, to have their way with you, because this is what lovers do, right? And we're talking about God and Christ, we're talking about our beloved, we're talking about that in which we are in love with, that is our deepest longing and desire. So if you can allow that someone else, that divine life, to have their way with you, and again, the key word is if you can allow it, because your ego and your mind is in the way, you will go back to your life of action with new vitality, but it will now be smooth, a much more natural flow, that flow of the Trinity, that flow of relational life, that flow of relational love. It will no longer be no longer you who acts or contemplates, but the life of one who lives in you, now acting for you and with you and as you. Is that a beautiful quote? Anybody out there? How about you mainlanders, all you people from New Brunswick? Does that resonate at all in your heart? No? How about you?
It was deep. There's a lot in that one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's all about relationship.
And I like the way it is, like, even there, to have their way with you, like, to really open up and, well, in this case, let God work in you what needs to be worked in you as you build relationship, both personal and spiritual.
Right. What about you, Jolene? How does that resonate with you?
It's interesting. It's deep for sure.
So much of our training and formation for all of us has been really at the mind level. How do we use our minds to be able to relate and function? Yeah. The invitation is to go deeper, right?
Yeah.
And so, if we're going to spiritually companion another, and if we're going to listen for what God is doing in them, we have to listen from a deeper place than our minds. And this is where your own prayer practices are so important. Yeah. What do you think, Paulette? How does that resonate with you?
Well, I love Richard Rohr, and I spent a lot of time reading him. And another aspect of this from a different angle is I mentor an education for ministry seminar group. And one of the things we talk about a lot in that is listening with the ear of the heart.
Right.
And yeah, and I think this is part of that. It's yeah. So it's good. You know, we need to be on that level rather than, you know, just the academic and the mind, and it needs to come from love in our heart.
Yes. Well, it's the spiritual heart or the mind of Christ is what we're talking about. And it's a deeper organ. It's a deeper spiritual organ that so many of us don't exercise and hardly know that it's even there.
Yeah.
And so, but it's there and waiting for us to be able to use it. But there's a bit of work to that.
It's Bob here, the mainlander, checking in.
God loves even mainlanders.
There you go. Originally from Nova Scotia. I don't know if that helps any, but what I'm getting from this is, as I was thinking about this, what you just read, and the word that really jumped out at me was trust.
Yes.
And I think allowing ourselves to be put in that position where trust can actually start to take place.
Right on.
And when that happens, then we allow ourselves to, be used by God a little bit more. And I think it just bonds the relationship and really cements things into place. And there has to be trust. If there isn't, then I don't think you can go anywhere.
No, and one of the opposites of trust is fear, and fear is an ego function. And that's how our egos work. You know, with reference to separateness. The whole competing thing. So, in order for us to be able to have genuine, deepening, trusting relationships where we can open up together and listen for God together, we have to go deeper ourselves. That's why I'm emphasizing this, because for you as supervisors and as leaders, is that the call on our heart is always to go deeper. Mm. And so that's, this is a lifelong thing for us. So, the spiritual journey is a lifelong adventure. And that's for all of us as people of prayer, people of God, people of love. This is a lifelong adventure. And one of the things I like to word about the adventure, because it's for those who you are supervising, they're coming to you with their own desire to fall into love and to fall into God, and their own willingness to open up. And as a person opens up, we encounter the living God. This is the adventure of it, so that when we're in these kinds of relationships, there's an adventure about it, there's an excitement about it, because as we give the invitation and permission to open up and listen more deeply, we actually experience the living God in such a life-giving way. So it's an adventure. And in this adventure, of course, in our own deepening of our prayer practices, like facilitating our capacity to open, this is it's a pilgrimage from a more surface ego-based identification to our deeper spiritual heart, or to our Christ identity, the mind of Christ. And this is the longing of our heart. That's the beloved. That's the beloved not only whom we are in love with and long for and desire, but is also our deepest and truest self. And so as supervisors, the invitation, of course, is to be in touch with and aware of your own spiritual evolution. Let's just talk about that for a moment. For you to be a supervisor, to be a companion, you have to be aware of and in touch with your own spiritual evolution. How does that resonate? Okay, what do you think?
It actually means a lot what you're saying, because I service 2 parishes, 5 churches, and you can become so involved in what you're doing, it feels more like any other job after 40 years of office work.
Right.
I have to remind myself
Mm-hmm.
of who I am and whose I am frequently, and this is how I do it.
Right, and it's evolving process. In other words, you haven't arrived, right?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, and so it's this deepening awareness that will factor into your capacity to be a spiritual companion to the students you're supervising. So, but then it becomes a shared journey, then, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then spiritual.
Andrew.
Go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was just going to say I don't think we naturally enjoy doing it. Like I think we like to think that we arrive at some point,
right.
And when we do that, I think we naturally stop being transparent. We naturally start not letting ourselves, our faults and stuff be on the table, and know that we have somewhere to go. And
right.
when we do that, obviously all the people around us stop doing it too.
Right on.
And so they stop growing, we all stop growing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm.
Hi, it's Ruby.
Ruby.
One of my thoughts around this is, as you said, this is lifelong. It's ongoing, and so from the time that we really took notice of our own spirituality, it's years for most of us.
Yes.
Years and years of work and training and reading and self-examination and everything else. And I think when we're supervising somebody, although we want to be able to give all that to them right now, we have to step back and say, well, they have to come to this on their own, but I'll try and guide them as much as I can. And it's going to take them years the same way that it took me years.
And so, and when you're trying to guide them, we're going to get into more of this, of course, as in our time together this morning. But just to put other words to what you just said, when we're trying to guide them when it comes to their own spiritual deepening, what we are doing is we are listening for what God is already doing in them and helping them hear what God is already doing in them where they are right now. And so this is where our practice of listening is so important, and because it is always listening for what God is already doing. Yes, no?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And even recognizing this is that this companioning, this guiding, this listening, it is an important component to a healthy spirituality, period, for all of us. But in my experience, this kind of deeper listening and companioning is something that is often overlooked or neglected. I know certainly in my own formation process and in my experience around the diocese, this is something where we don't like to go.
It's true.
We're only now introducing in our diocese here in the East an invitation to explore spiritual direction relationships, for clergy with trained spiritual directors. We're recognizing that if, whatever church is emerging, whatever God is doing in the church, as leaders, we have to be listening much more deeply to what Spirit is already doing. And so we need to, so I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to leave a little silence around it, but you don't have to respond. Is who companions you? So here we're talking about you companioning, students. I'm asking the question, who's companioning you as a supervisor? Do you have a friend or a spiritual guide or a spiritual director that helps you listen for what God is doing in you? I think that's an important question for you to ask, because the flip side of this is if we're not practicing with someone listening to us and guiding us, and in that practice, how can we really be listening with and guiding another? So I know, again, I just put it out for you to ponder or to be challenged by, but every one of us need to be companioned.
It's Dave Alston here.
Dave.
I don't think you can get all of this from one person. I think I get some of this from different people, and together they support me, and I feel loved and cherished and enlightened. Most importantly, I guess, enlightened by what they bring to me and what they reflect back from what they hear from me.
Oh, good. That's the community component of spiritual companioning. So that's another aspect to spirituality and spiritual practice, is the community around us. You're right. It's not just one person. You know, there is a kind of network of how we are listened to and supported. Thank you for that. This is an icon of Abbot Minas. This comes out of a 4th century contemplative community in Beirut, in the Egyptian desert. When I was last year for the Beaumont Hamel 100th anniversary, my wife and I went to France, and so we took a couple of weeks, rented a car, and drove around everywhere. And we took some time at Taizé. And Taizé is a religious community in central France that attracts youth from all over the world. And what's so cool about Taizé is the depth of listening that's going on there. And so regardless of music, regardless of culture, language, Taizé is a place where everybody can listen in the same way. And there's 3 things about the Taizé community about communicating and listening. One is the chant that's used at Taizé. So no matter, again, your language, the chants are simple and short. You can know the meaning of them in your own language, but you sing them together as a community of hundreds, and you're singing the same spirit, and you're connecting with people at a deeper level than mind. Another important part of the listening at Taizé is the silence, and so that after chanting, there's big periods of silence where this community of hundreds of people, they're listening together in the silence for what God is doing. A third significant area at Taizé for listening is iconography. And so no matter what language you speak, you can be with an icon in prayer, and it's going to communicate to you in a universal way. This icon of Abbot Minas is one of the icons at Taizé, and it's about spiritual companioning. And just to finish my little story, because this icon is actually at the Louvre in Paris, and I got to sit in front of this icon for about an hour, and some of the remnants of the old monastery where hundreds and hundreds of contemplatives would have sat and prayed, and it was a very powerful and connecting experience for me. But this icon is, again, it's about spiritual companion. So you have Jesus on the right, and Abbot Minas is on the left, and Jesus has his hand his arm around Abbot Minas, and he is companioning him. And Abbot Minas then companions his community, and then it goes on and on and on. But it's the invitation to come alongside one another, to listen deeply and in love. Spiritual companionship, I think, is what we all really long for. And I think it's one of the reasons why we're all in ministry, is because of our love for the beloved and our desire to be in love with that beloved and every other. And so I think there's something within us, our God life, that wants to connect with and come alongside every other, is willing to say yes. This is what spiritual companion is about. Julia of Norwich, she's a 14th century English anchoress, a mystic and a theologian. And after her revelation, she received permission to live in a cell that was connected to the church in Norwich. And pilgrims would come to her cell window for spiritual direction. In our own English history, that the spiritual companion, spiritual direction, a longing for another to listen deeply for what's going on inside of us, is very much part of our tradition. The Cloud of Unknowing is another English 14th century work on mysticism. And the work is about a spiritual guide giving spiritual direction to a young monk, is probably what it is. But again, it's about amplifying that sense of spiritual companioning and a deeper contemplative listening. Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, and I am so in love with Teresa of Avila. She is a passionate mystic, and for the two of these people, and again, what I love about them is their passion to to be in deep spiritual companioning relationships. Teresa would fall in love with everybody and want to have soul conversations and soul talks, and it's an inspiration to us as clergy, but as spiritual people, to want to connect spiritually with who's ever willing to say yes to us, and our need for that. And in your role as supervisors, I can only hope, that the ones that you're supervising are people who want to have spiritual conversations, and probably most, their first desire, I would like to think. So this whole thing around spiritual conversations and spiritual listening is so much part of our tradition and our Christian tradition. And the reason why I bring that up is because for most of the training I'm aware of in theological formation has been in the psychotherapy model, so that your pastoral counseling courses that we've all done are about what's the problem, what's the solution, and that's kind of how we function, and it's how our minds function. And these are important ministry skills to have. Of course they are. That when we're talking about spiritual companioning in your role as a supervisor, that will have a role, of course. But when it comes to spiritual development or spiritual formation, that's not where we're coming from. So that pastoral counseling psychotherapy model is not what I'm talking to you about. I just want to name that. And as we mentioned, I think it was Dave who mentioned about the community who helped, as part of his own support and listening. There's a number of different ways of spiritual companioning, a number of different levels of spiritual companioning. The community is certainly part of that, your church, or your family, or your friends. There's also another level of spiritual companion, which is a kind of friendship where we're listening together, and we kind of have a covenant to help each other listen, and we talk, and we explore. And there's another form of spiritual companion, which is spiritual direction. We actually have trained spiritual directors, who can help, come alongside and listen more deeply for what God is doing. I just want to stop there for a moment when it comes to delineating these variations in, spiritual companioning. Any that resonate with you? How about you, Mary? You out there, Mary? How about you, Ruby? Only the mainlanders stay with us, everyone else tuned out?
I'm still here, Ruby.
Okay.
When I think of psychotherapy and pastoral counseling, I've done or been part of psychotherapy myself, and I know the person that was guiding me through it, had years of training and education, and for what we receive as, in our academic studies, it's so minimal. I often don't feel qualified to be able to do that.
Right, but of course, short of being a therapist, but the only reason I highlight that is because our model of listening in our training has been this kind of a model, problem solution. So
and psychotherapy, of course, guides a person to kind of figure things out themselves.
Right. That's right. And again, so that's the kind of mind kind of listening. And again, I just kind of list these out because, again, the invitation is for us to listen from a deeper place, right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, cool. The work of spirituality is to look with a different pair of eyes. So this is why I just highlight those kind of differences, right? Because spirituality is different than the pastoral care model. The work of spirituality is to look with a different pair of eyes, non-dual eyes, which means eyes deeper than our thinking mind, beyond what Thomas Merton calls the shadow and the disguise of things. The shadow and the disguise of things, until you can see them in their connectedness and wholeness. In a very real sense, the word God is just a synonym for everything. So if you do not want to get involved with everything, Stay away from God. Isn't that beautiful? God is just a synonym for everything. Because all is one in God, right? I mean, everything's connected in God. God is all in all. And so our minds, our thinking minds, cannot see that connectedness. But spirituality is about learning how to see with a deeper pair of eyes. So the purpose of spiritual companioning, then, is discernment. It's listening with our spiritual heart for what love is doing in the life of the one we are companioning. For what love is doing. And God is love, of course, and I like to use the word love instead of God because it makes a shift in my consciousness. When I'm talking about what's God doing in your life, it's kind of can be an idea and concept, and I feel a sense of separateness. When I say, what's God doing? God being kind of out there somewhere. But when I say listening for what love is doing, it kind of shifts it to a deeper place within me. There's more of an energy, a conscious energy that I can tap into anyway when I say love. And so in your companioning for students, what we're listening for really is what love is doing in their life. What is love doing in their life? Spiritual companion is not so much about mind listening as it is about heart listening. And your own contemplative practice is about opening up your own heart space in order to listen more deeply and to love more deeply. So let's take a few minutes now and talk about this. And what stands out for you here, what speaks for you there, what doesn't. All right. Who haven't we heard from much? Brent, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I think what stands out for me is I've been doing some work in our archdeaconry about discernment committees for people thinking about going into priesthood. And so this is really helpful. Just thinking about, it's not about each person in the room thinking about should this person go on to be a deacon or a priest, but going back and searching, is this what God is calling them to do? And how do you listen with your spiritual heart to hear that, not going through our own standards and ideas, but yeah, that whole idea of what is God up to in their life? What is God calling this person to? And that actually frees us up a whole lot. It's not about what we think. It's about trying to so it's a whole lot of freedom in that. So it's very helpful.
Yes, and thank you for saying that, Brent, because it's so freeing for you and I. So when we're sitting with that other person and listening for what love is doing, you're free of it. You're helping the other person hear what God is already doing. I mean, so you don't have to figure anything out, right? And so you're just helping them. So out of what they're saying or what they're presenting, you're helping them hear what they're saying and what Spirit is doing. So there is a lot of freedom in that. So what about this, when I say about your own contemplative practice, is about opening up your heart space. So Brent, when we talk about, about listening from that deeper place, listening from that deeper place comes from a practice of listening in that deeper place, right? As a prayer practice. So let's just talk about contemplative practice for a moment. What's this? How do you understand contemplative practice?
Is that a question to me?
You're all conflict. That's all you're about. That's Rick Singleton coming in, disrupting the class, causing conflicts.
I'm just checking with your time-wise.
How we doing?
Well.
Yeah. What time we finish?
Good. Well, how long would you like to?
It's supposed to be over now.
No. We can go till 11:30.
11:30. Yeah. That's our plan.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
All right.
Good. I'll be back.
You'll be back.
Schwarzenegger.
Yes.
I'll be back.
I'll be back. It was a threat. All right. So we're contemplative practice. Let's just talk about this for a minute. This is important. And in fact, I would like to hear from everybody for a few words, a sentence or two, and what contemplative practice is for you or what you wish it were for you. And we're going to start with 2 people in this room, and then I'm going to go through the list that I got here. So Jolene, contemplative practice, what is that for you, or what would you like it to be for you?
Contemplative practice for me now is not near what I would like it to be.
Be honest and vulnerable, thank you.
Yeah. And I've never looked at it in this way before, as opening your heart. You know what I mean? So I would like it to be more that way. And I find it's harder when we try to think about what God is doing in our lives or how God is working in our lives, and to take that and look at it as what is love doing in your, right? It's a whole new meaning.
It shifts it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Same thing, but it's just it just gives it a whole different.
It shifts the optic a little bit, your perspective.
Yeah.
How about the Bjorn or Peninsula? What's happening with love and contemplative practice on the Bjorn Peninsula?
Hard to say sometimes, because you try to work into it. And as we talked a bit earlier about, just before you went in spiritual direction, about giving praise, the one that don't get it can take back of what you're doing. So when you're trying to open up love to those who you think, well, I guess go back to you think, God may be calling, or spiritual discernment, there's always something else to take that joy away.
Right.
So I don't know if that's sort of answering the question, because probably in my mind I don't totally understand what the question says also. But just getting more deep into yourself, it's hard to do.
Yes.
Because it's challenging. Like,
yes.
Even some of these quotes you were doing, I'm like, wow, I didn't look at supervision as in-depth spiritual direction. I looked at supervision as, I think, the physical day-to-day activities that we are doing.
Yeah, and thank you.
So right now, in my mind, it's like, okay, where do supervision end, spiritual direction start, and what am I in the role?
Yeah, so let me make it clear again. So, I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you for that, because this is not about spiritual direction. This is an invitation for you to listen more deeply as a companion. So I'm a trained spiritual director.
Yes.
So I got 4 years invested in that, right? So again, the invitation is for all of us, regardless of what our training or experience is to listen more deeply in our own lives, first of all.
Yeah.
So your own practice of listening to what God and what love is doing in your own life. But then the person you're supervising is to be able to have some sense of inviting that deeper listening. So it's not about having all figured out and being, So it's about just the practice of listening, what this is about.
Yeah. But the practice of listening is a whole lot harder if we're not listening to ourselves, right? If we're not listening within,
Yeah. So if you have no practice of listening for what love is doing inside of you.
Yeah, then how can you do it to anyone else?
Yeah. All right. How are you, Paulette? Do you know anything about love listening on the West Coast?
Oh, sorry, I didn't have my mic on. I find contemplative practice, I find it difficult. Like I spend time more thinking about it than practicing it.
Right.
And I find when you read more, you really want to be doing it, but I do find it really difficult. I find it my mind wanders and I'm thinking what I got to do next. And so I've been trying, and I have a prayer group that meets every Tuesdays, and we've been doing a little bit of work with the group, and I find that helps.
Yeah.
Because I find when I try to, read to them about it and talk about it and spend some time in silence, that helps.
Right.
But I'm nowhere where I would like to be.
Okay, cool. How about you, Charlene? Charlene?
Yes, I do spend some time. I don't always, not doing it as regularly as I used to, but I do a lot of, I use a lot of meditation in contemplative practice to, to sit, with God and open myself up to what He's saying to me. And I use, and I usually start with some passage in the Word of God, in the Bible, and but I know there are days I don't spend, I don't spend as much time, and some days I don't spend any time. But the busyness sometimes gets in the way, and I know I shouldn't allow that to happen, because the life is much better when I spend that time with God.
Absolutely. How are you, James? Yeah, what is contemplative practice for you? What would you like it to be?
These days, a lot of contemplative practice is thinking about myself out of my comfort zones, because I spend a lot of time outside my comfort zones, or I try to push myself to get out of my comfort zone.
Right.
Because in a lot of what I do now, I'm learning. I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out every day what I'm doing, and there's an awful lot of things on my mind, which doesn't give me a lot of time for contemplation.
Okay, fair enough.
But when I do, the time I spend doing the work in ministry, I always try and spend some time afterwards reflecting on how it went, how it made me feel, and how I feel more free to love after each of those things.
Right. Well, that's good. Good. All right, good. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to share anything?
Bob here.
Bob?
I guess I echo what a lot of the other people mentioned, that I'm not where I want to be, but I try. I think I spend too much time maybe talking and listening, and I have to remember that we were created as human beings, not human doings.
Yay,
and we don't spend, I'll give John Bradshaw credit for that one, but we don't spend enough time just being. And I try to stress that to people that I'm in contact with, and I have to practice what I preach, of course. But as was mentioned there, I try to reflect too on things that have happened and how did I experience it. What is God trying to say to me through this? And but it just seems to be something that it's a lifelong thing, where I don't know if totally ever get it 100%, but I think God is interested in the effort, and so I try to keep trying. So
yeah. and even just name a spade, Bob, is that your trying that you name and articulate is actually God trying in you, and as so that's the activity of the Spirit. Just the fact that you're trying and you want to try, and that is the Spirit, and groaning for that more of communion. So delight in that, delight in the trying.
Thank you for that.
Yes. Anybody else?
Hi, it's Ruby.
Ruby, go ahead, Ruby.
Okay. Like everyone else, I don't do what I should do. I feel like Paul when I say that. Why do I do the things I shouldn't do?
Terrible person.
One practice that I try is at night I read a page or so out of a prayer book, not necessarily Anglican prayer books, but to almost like a Lectio Divina thing, that I read it and I think, what are they saying? Because in our services, we do so much by rote, just like blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And we're not really stopping to pay attention all the time.
Right.
And then in the age of technology, because I get on the computer and get lost in things, I've started listening to Pray As You Go, which I find really good. It's about 15 minutes.
Right.
And it makes you think about things. I also started doing meditation through Headspace, because I don't find myself disciplined enough to just sit down and meditate, and I have in Headspace, they're guiding you through it. And then on my Facebook, like I have Brother Give Us a Word or something from John O'Donohue or Jean Vanier, and I find just reading those help me to think as well.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else?
Yes, Andrew here. When I first went to the ministry or whatever, I knew going in that I have a well, shortly after, maybe I found out that I have an ENTJ personality in the Myers-Briggs. And I mean, one of the careers to stay away from is clergy. Right? And so I learned that after, of course, entering the ministry. So it became a bit of a joke a little bit, but I also remember that, is not what I do that is God doing the calling, right? And so God will equip if I'm willing to grow. Right. And so one of the things that I've done as a practice now, I like everyone else, we should do it more, but I try to start my day off a little humbly and say, if there's something on my tightly agenda that you need to move for me to listen to my heart or direct someone or direct me, you do that. And so God's pretty faithful in that. And I think you're right. I think it's God within us pushing us to do these things when we want to do them. Yes. When we have that desire to do them, right? Right. And so He's pretty faithful in that. I've been pushed, and so leaning away from thinking and more towards feeling and those sort of, and I give God the credit when that happens. I know it's not me; it's the calling on my life,
not you,
not me, right? No.
That's excellent.
Yeah. Love you too, Joe.
Yes, all for love, man. It's all for love, Andrew. Anybody else?
Brent here.
Brent.
One of the things doing, and it drives me nuts, and it's hard for me to do, but it's been helpful. Is like a lot of people, we get busy doing and don't take time to reflect. I've actually been doing a little bit of a journal, and it's been really interesting snapshots, because I only do it about once a week, and I try to do it faithfully. Right. But it certainly shows just kind of what's might be frustrating you or on your mind, or what your hopes are. And it's always been interesting to look back from week to week to see what God has either been challenging with or encouraging me with. And I suggest that active, that ability to sit down and slow down, just to actually to put something on paper and think about it. And it almost becomes a bit of a prayer back to God. And so this idea of a journal, even I know some people journal quite naturally, but for me it's almost impossible. And so it's been a good challenge, and it's been rewarding.
Brent, that is an excellent prayer practice, and actually, just to elaborate on that a little more, is that when we give ourselves to the experience of our deepening in God, which is beyond words and concepts, is that it's a good practice to allow ourselves to think about and more deeply understand and integrate those experiences in a journal. And so even as we give ourselves to contemplative practice, however that manifests itself for us, using a journal afterwards is part of helps our understanding and integrating what God is doing in us. So thank you for that. All right, anyone else before we move on?
Bob again. One thing I do on my calendar, I leave a couple open spaces, and rather than just jamming it packed full with things.
Good for you.
And what I've found is that when I leave those open spaces, 9 times out of 10, something comes up and it hits exactly where that open space is.
Right.
And I think in some ways I'm allowing God to, have His say during the week. Mm-hmm. And so some would say, "Oh, you're not doing anything." I said, "Well, I think I'm just allowing God to, step in, and I think we can get too compressed, and we have to have every little part of our day filled up, and realize that God does have an agenda as well, and that we need to step aside."
That's right, and we got to listen for what God's agenda is, right? That's right, yeah. And the space is excellent. Thank you, Bob, for that. All right, my friends, we just went through that. What is your prayer practice? I got another Roar quote I want us to look at. In many ways, and this is, so I love this quote, and it has a lot to do with, some of your own resistance that we as this little community is formed, that we are, a lot of us have echoed our resistance to deeper prayer. And so just listen to this beautiful quote. In many ways, prayer, certainly contemplative prayer meditation, is planned and organized failure. Do you hear that? I hope that comforts you. Everybody who wants it, but it's not happening, kind of thing. To try to practice contemplative or meditative prayer is planned and organized failure. If you're not prepared for failure, you'll avoid prayer. And that's what most people do. Prayer is typically not an experience of immediate union, satisfaction, or joy. In fact, quite the opposite. Usually, and this is it, usually you meet your own incapacity for and resistance to union. You encounter, here it is, your thinking, your judging, your controlling, your accusing, your blaming, your fearing mind. Isn't that true for you? So why pray? Isn't this true? Let's just, if anyone wants to, before we go on to the second part of the quote, how does that resonate with you and what we're saying? Because remember, now it's all in the context of deeper listening, right? In the context of companioning another, and so your own sense of resistance of going deeper, of failing at this. How does that resonate for you? Anybody? The initial stages when we're trying to quiet our heart space is dealing with this crazy mind of ours, that's on overdrive and always going. People say, I'd like to be able to stop my mind. Yeah. But the truth is you can't. That's the way it works. But the invitation for us is to get beneath the mind. And that's the way of Jesus and the kenosis that we're invited into. Because your mind does the judging and the controlling and the accusing, the blaming. And as we deepen our spiritual practices, we actually learn to observe the mind instead of giving in to it. And so we become less of a prisoner to what the mind is doing. And so that's what contemplative practice does. It gets us beneath our minds, where we can actually observe it and be free of it and listen from another place within us. Rohr goes on, he says, what we're doing in prayer is letting our self-made foundation, that is our false self, and the false self is your ego and your thinking mind. Self-consciousness is not bad in and of itself. It's a gift of God, but there's more to us than our egos and our thinking minds. So what we're doing in prayer is letting go of our self-made foundation, crumble, so that God's foundation can be our reality. See, for most of us, we live our lives at that self-conscious level only, that thinking mind level only. Prayer is a practice in failure that overcomes our resistance to union with love. Prayer is a practice that allows us to get past or underneath our thinking minds and egos to union with love. And so Rohr finishes off and says, let's fall into and rest in that love one more time. Any comments? How does that speak to you? What does that say to you?
Paulette here. I really like this, and I find it really good. That I think it's difficult too, because it is really difficult for most of us to crumble and to give over ourselves completely. I find I always hold back part of myself.
Yes.
In whatever I do, and it's something I know I need to work on. And it's good to know that I guess that prayer is failing, because that's kind of the way I feel a lot of the time. So it's really good to know that I can continue to fail, but yet continue to try at the same time.
Yeah, and the failing, Paulette, is giving up to our mind's control. So the failing is that our mind, in our deepening prayer and our journey into our spiritual hearts, it's about the mind losing control. So that's what the failing is, because the mind wants to control, and all your prayers and all your, are so caught up in your stream of thinking consciousness, And what Rohr is saying here, and what the mystical tradition is saying here, or contemplative prayer, or contemplative Christianity is saying, is that, we have to, continue day after day this process of letting go of the mind's need to control and manipulate. Letting go of the ego's fear and those tendencies, and being able to, fall into our spiritual hearts. And so the practice, and that's called dying, right? So failing is another way of saying dying. And we're called to
dying to our old self, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, again, Jesus says, whoever tries to save his life will lose, but whoever loses his life will save it. That's what we're talking about here. Losing this false sense of self and going deeper.
That's exactly what came to mind when you were going to make God's foundation all reality. And I went right back to that quote the scripture, you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Ourself, dying for God's sake. Right?
Yes. And this is a self that we're holding on to. And again, in the context of what this seminar is about, it's about where are you listening from as you supervise another. Are you listening from your thinking mind only, or are you listening from, your spiritual heart? And so clearly the invitation is all over this seminar is the invitation. Now, where are we to here? Okay, so next, where are we to? There we go. All right, so we're going to do a little prayer practice before we finish. But I just want to say quickly about cataphatic and apophatic prayer. Cataphatic prayer is prayer where we are using our minds. And so much of our prayer is at that place of, so look, for the liturgy, for an example, all the words of the liturgy, all the things we do, so many different forms of our prayer, imaginative, even various forms of contemplative prayer where we're intentionally engaged in using our thinking minds to focus instead of being all over the place. I'm not going to list out, your sky's the limit when it comes to cataphatic prayer. Apophatic prayer, and this is where where we're going, is the prayer beneath our words and concepts. It's the prayer beneath our words and concepts. Apophatic prayer would be what St. John of the Cross would call the dark night of the soul. Mm-hmm. And that dark being, not, trouble or misery, but darkness meaning dark to the senses. That is that prayer that is, that your mind can't put a word or concept to. That's the darkness. Or that's the cloud of unknowing that other English mystic wrote about. So apophatic prayer is that prayer that is beyond, it's the longings and groanings, like St. Paul says of all creation. It's the deep longing of our heart that is beyond words or concepts. That is that longing to be in union, in loving union with God and with all of creation. That's that deeper experience. So in our deepening prayer, in our deepening listening for what God is doing in us, for what love is doing in us, and those who are supervising, there is a movement from cataphatic prayer to apophatic prayer, from wordy prayer to wordless prayer. It is moving from mind listening to heart listening. Contemplative listening is what we're talking about. And the essence of it is openness, receptivity, and stillness. So when we are companioning another, when we are coming alongside another to in a process of spiritual formation, which is what we're talking about in this role for you as companions, ultimately we want to be able to, as we are present, we want to be in a place of openness, receptivity, and stillness. So we're going to do a little prayer practice now, and we'll probably have a moment or two to chat about it afterwards. But the prayer practice is be still and know that I'm God. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to sit back in your chairs. I want to ask you to put your feet flat on the floor, your forearms on your thighs if you can, and just to have your head positioned in such a way that to maintain your greater sense of alertness. And I just want you to kind of settle into your breath now for a moment. And as I pray this prayer from the Psalms, I'm going to pray right through, and then I'm going to pray it backwards, and just allow the words to, and as you focus on the words, allow those words to speak to you, to settle you, to open you, to still you in your deeper identity in God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. Prayer was ended.
Okay, I'll just ask again if there's anyone hearing us.
So,
okay, if not, I can stop recording at least.
Yeah.
The system has been
So
working.
just
So thanks, Gerald, for that,
Yeah.
and you'll be back next week.
We'll just bring our little practical close in. So how'd you find that?
I found it really good, really
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
But helpful.
Yeah.
Calming.
Yeah.
You know we lost you, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but get some of the prayer in.
We lost you about 5 minutes or more ago.
Okay.
We lost you at Be Still.
Still, all right, that's a good place to lose me. Perfect place. I planned it that way. That's the center of the universe. Good.
Thank you, Gerald.
Anyway, everybody, that was grand. And so our next session together, we're going to do some more stuff around for listening, and we'll probably have a few more contemplative practices also. So just for us to experience and talk about together. What do you think?
Thank you. Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, God love you all. Even the mainlanders, God love you.
Anyway, gang, I sent the PowerPoint decks yesterday, and we'll upload the recording and distribute that as well for those who need it. Thank you, Gerald. Thank you all.
My friend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.